Okay, so I'm delighted to be here this evening since last year was my first major sports conference at Geneva. And so there's a sense in which this is still a relatively new area for me. So what we're going to do in this session is I'm going to do my reflections on the day and try not to be too long-winded about it. And then I'm going to ask my distinguished colleagues up here with me to speak. And I've got His Royal Highness Prince Ali bin Al Hussein of Jordan. I've got Brent Wilton from who's head of workplace rights at Coca-Cola company, and Viet Nguyen. Is that roughly? I'll try my best. Sorry, Nguyen. Viet Nguyen, who's the member of UNESCO's Youth and Sport Task Force, and I'll be asking them to reflect on the day also, but also a couple of questions to follow up on. So yes, it's quite an exciting time in many respects, but as colleagues have pointed out earlier today, it's also quite troubling with this context within which we're working. It does bear repeating, I think, of nationalism and so on and so forth. But last year for me was hugely, hugely informative and excellent for making networks in an area which, as I say, was not familiar with me. Or to me. My focus has been actually on the Modern Slavery Act, particularly transparency in supply chains, Section 54, 2015. And that is a really important piece of legislation in the UK. And I think there are some other examples of that elsewhere. The corporate vigilance law has already been mentioned in France, and of course there's the California Act. But it did strike me a little while ago that, particularly in our Premier League, any company that has a turnover of more than £36 million has to make a report on what they're doing to eliminate modern slavery from their supply chains. And inevitably working on that, I've worked with loads of different sectors: construction, fashion, technology, many of whom those colleagues are in this room today. And inevitably, I think also some of the issues, or many of the issues raised by the Modern Slavery Act, and indeed by modern slavery in its various forms, not just through trafficking, but also through forced labour and abusive labour systems in supply chains, interconnect with each other, and indeed some of these topics that we've been discussing today. There are also recurring themes, and one of them is leadership. And that was discussed earlier today too. I think somebody used that phrase, walk the talk. That's what's needed. And it's really interesting to me because we can have all the modern slavery statements in the world, but if nothing ever changes, then what is the point? So that's also to do with implementation and monitoring. And again, those subjects were brought up earlier today. I mentioned the context within which we're working, and again, these kind of seep through into many of the issues that we're discussing, whether that be gender exploitation and discrimination, and also, of course, xenophobia, racism, and other potent forms of populist nationalism. And I wondered if we would get a better press for settlers from elsewhere if we rebranded migrants, as the phrase was this morning, as trainees from other countries. So we don't have a migrant problem anymore. We have lots of trainees from other countries, and it's great. So I think in that context then, to find that we are all here today, and I think I can say safely we all love sport, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We all love sport, and we also love the idea that it's connected with something that's better than the individual, that moves us into a different place, that gives us some sort of sense of identity and raises the human spirit in much the same way, although also slightly different to the ways in which arts and culture do. And I like to make the link between the two because those are my two sort of favourite areas of work. That thing about humanising, it's not about politicising. To me, politics is in everything anyway, so I don't see how people can accuse us of politicising sport. Is already there. But that phrase that was used earlier this morning about humanising the issues and making sure that people understand that human rights shouldn't be something that's threatening and something to be scared of. If you think about the opposite of it, it would be really strange to say, you know what, I really hate the idea of human rights. I think modern slavery is such a great idea. Let's really go for it. Let's make a statement which says we don't give a damn about what we do in our supply chains as long as we make loads of money. Yeah. And if people maybe were honest about that, then we could really flush them out. So, but within that, I think governments obviously have a role to play because of legislation, and we may have a chance to discuss that or not later. But I do think it's an important instrument, although it only works when it's implemented properly and it's monitored and reviewed. The regulatory bodies obviously have a huge role to play, and again that was picked up this morning, the power to be part of the solution. I thought that was a really interesting phrase as well, the power to be part of the solution. And I think that is shown by some of the examples that people have discussed, primarily the reference to what's been happening in Afghanistan. So, but again, I emphasise implementation and monitoring is essential. On one level, you could say we've got, especially in the UK and other sort of developed democracies, we've got loads of legislation to make sure that men and women are treated equally, black people, white people, people from elsewhere, people with disabilities. All the legislation is there on the books. But what happens? We have a rise in hate crimes, we have no less gender or racial discrimination. Some of you will have seen Raheem Sterling talking about that earlier this week. And it's like, okay, so we've got all the laws there, but who is doing the work, the real work, to make sure that they actually work? And I think that is down to us, but it's also down to a lot of people who actually aren't in this room. And that's another area where we need to flush people out and get them either to attend or to somehow engage with us in a much more active way. There were some surprising things, but then maybe I should say some shocking things, but not so surprising in one respect. And there was that when somebody said you were more likely to be abused at the top of the elite scale of sport and by somebody within your own circle. As I say, shocking but not surprising. And I think that issue is, again, to me, there's something around, if we want young people to participate in sport and to enjoy sport, people don't talk about the pleasure of sport, the enjoyment of sport is really, really important. That's what it should be about to me. And of course, some of us also have a desire to win and to be competitive, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to take away that pleasure with the thought or with the idea or with the actuality of potentially being abused, whether that's physically, emotionally, intellectually or sexually, is really, really horrible. And we need to act really quickly. We can't have any kind of, oh yeah, I really don't like that, it's not a really good idea, and then go away and go back to doing what we were doing before. What is it that practically we are going to do? So all of those issues that have been raised around abuse, whether it's racist, whether there's sexual discrimination, human rights abuses, and so on and so forth, should all be part of they're all part of a system to me. And so maybe in some respects we need to think a bit more holistically about them. We were talking, I think, during the coffee break this morning about a particular fashion company which currently, which currently has an issue with sexual misconduct, but that could apply to any number of people. Anyway, there's a particular fashion company has recently been outed as having this problem with sexual misconduct at the top level. And I think that fashion company also has some very good policies, not only around discrimination, but around modern slavery, about environmental sustainability. So how is it that you can't make the connection between one type of good behaviour and another type of behaviour which is clearly abusive and exploitative? And to me that's really interesting, but really important to iron out some of those wrinkles and say, if you're not getting one part of the business right, then it undermines absolutely what you're doing elsewhere. That needs to be sorted. I've been working a lot with the fashion sector. In some ways, the parallels are quite interesting because the fashion sector will always say it's very special, it's got its own specificity, and there's no other industry like it. Just as sports people say it's very special, it's got its own specificity, and there's nowhere else like it. But I think in many respects, they're both true. And so what we have to do is try and work out where we can also share learnings across different sectors. And I think, you know, there's some very interesting things that can be learnt there, particularly around leadership. And I think within the fashion industry, there are known, as well as in technology, there are known disruptors of the norm. So who in sport, what organisations in sport, which individuals are disruptors of the norm in a way that benefits the kind of agenda that we're interested in? And if we can't sort of think about who they are, how can we encourage, nurture and create some of them? It's great to have good intentions. A phrase we often come across in modern slavery statements is, our company has zero tolerance to modern slavery. And again, I say, yeah, so what? You know, everybody would say that, wouldn't they? And if you didn't, what would you be saying? Well, we have a 10% tolerance of modern slavery. No, you know, it's about doing this thing of actually the actions following up from the policies. If you've got a framework, it's difficult enough. But if you've got no framework, it's really, really difficult to understand what it is that's going on within your company, organisation, team or whatever, and find out what's effective. So, I don't want to take up all the time because, you know, I don't want to take away from panellists, but I do want to just come back a little bit to that very powerful session that we had around sexual abuse of athletes, because I think that also is very important, because there's some key things in there that I found really troubling. First of all, the idea that you can pay off somebody, and this is not about the person accepting that money, not at all, but the idea that there's a monetary value on this to keep your mouth shut so that we don't have to be embarrassed about it. And you think, what kind of business, any kind of business could come to that conclusion? And although the club may have redeemed themselves somewhat subsequently, I want them to think very seriously, and others to think very seriously, about the kind of mindset that produces that kind of thought. How do you get to that space where you think that that's the right thing to do, rather than to think, oh my God, what have we done? How can we develop some kind of remedy? How can we prevent this thing happening again? That's the immediate thought, and to give that person support. So really, and to a greater or lesser extent, this idea that of saying, oh, you know, sport is a business and therefore we're all commercial. Not every commercial company is like that. And in fact, the trend that I've seen is definitely away from that kind of model that wants to hide everything and pretend that everything's all right until there's a huge disaster. So is that what it takes? Is that what we're saying? We've got to wait for a huge disaster or masses of people to have been revealed as having been abused before sports organisations will really take this seriously. And actually, to some extent, as I've sort of hinted, I'm not even necessarily talking about the people in this room who are at least trying to do things. It's about the people who aren't here. How do we get to them and make them understand that we all love sport, but we're deeply troubled by these trends? And my final point will be about sport, as I say, being a force for good. It's about something that we love to do, we love to watch, we love to participate in it, however poorly, we like to have fun, and we want young people to do the same. And that is a really strong thing, I think, for many of us here, the good that sport can do. But unless we change, and I think change quite rapidly, we might not have the opportunity to really realise that ambition. Young people, I think a lot of younger people need to be enabled to participate in governance. You know, it's really bizarre the way we set up these systems so that young people can't participate, and yet we keep banging on about them. So let's set up governance and other leadership roles so that young people can participate. And then I think we'll be in a position to be much more diligent in making this big change happen. So now I'm going to turn to my colleagues on the panel and ask them for some of their reflections on the day. And if I may, Your Highness, I'll start with you, what's the main thing that you would take away from what you've heard today or this afternoon?
Thank you very much. I think the main thing that one can take away is all the issues that we've heard today are all interrelated in a way, and maybe I can give a bit of a reflection over some of the things that we've heard and we've seen. For example, when it started off with the issue of players' rights, and I think that it was great for us to hear Jason Essen, for example, talking about what they're doing, how they're studying this. We need to know what's going on. The main issue in sports in general, and I think this was also touched upon, is that all officials have to recognize that we are working for the players. It's not the other way around. For example, with the issue of trafficking for children under 18, it's a huge issue. But again, with that, you need to have governments working on this as well. Sports organizations can't do it alone. And oftentimes we see, and I've seen previously when we've talked about these issues, that, for example, yes, elite players are one thing, but again, the majority of players who are suffering from that don't get the chances that they should have. Just to give you an example, from Africa, you have so many players who come to Europe. They're taken advantage of by criminal elements who are in the guise of promoting them and so on. And in different parts of the world, you have to realize that there is also a culture of shame. So you have African players who end up coming to Europe. Their whole family has put all their money into getting them, into the continent. And quite frankly, they end up on the streets because for them it's a shame to go back home and say, "Look, I didn't make it." When you talk to organizations, they'll say, "Okay, well, the agents are from Africa, so it's an African problem." You talk to Europe, and they say, "Look, it's not our problem." So I think everybody needs to work together in that, and obviously also again work with governments. It was obviously to go on to the other subject, which and I just want to thank Karen and Colin and Jessica for telling us, about their experiences. And I do want to say one thing, that, they should not worry in any way about telling their stories, because that's the only way you're going to help people and players in the future. We have two ladies from Afghanistan, Khalida Bhopal and Shabnam Mubaraz, and they've been very courageous in coming out and discussing these issues as well. But you need to have these issues come out by people who have had those experiences. I cannot do that because I haven't had that. And if you hear it from the people themselves, then that's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of strength. I would like to just add on to that, because, again, going to some other issues that were raised about, for example, players being part of boards and involved in what's going on a decision-making level. For example, in our own FA in Jordan, the captain of our women's national team is elected on our board. And sometimes people get a little bit hesitant about that from other organizations, saying, why should, it's not up to players who are literally playing right now to be a part of this. And it's the total opposite, because the athletes themselves know their own problems, and they can communicate with each other and hear any concerns that maybe for other athletes it's difficult to give to officials. But they talk amongst themselves. So the more participation that they have is crucial to getting these issues out and so on. So I think I just wanted to touch on those, and don't want to take too much time. But those are just some of the issues that I thought to
No, I think that's a
comment on.
really important point, the point about participation, and then about the kind of tools it gives you to speak to other people about it. But I did want to ask you just a little bit about your foundation, because you're using football it's in a different way there, isn't it? That
Yes.
You're using it. Would you mind saying a little bit about that?
Well, AFDP is something that we started originally in Asia, and it was called the Asian Football Development Project. And I was elected in 2011 to represent Asia as the Vice President on the FIFA Executive Committee. To be quite frank, when I got there, I looked and I said, look, what can we do? Because if I'm going to be in this position, I want to do something and give back. And I figured not to critique anyone else, but I said, look, I'm getting this salary from FIFA. I might as well use it for this purpose, to help the development of our youth. And football, for example, is the most popular sport in the world, and you can use it for real social responsibility. Sometimes with organizations, social responsibility is seen only in terms of improving the image of the organization, rather than actually doing something that's good, whether it's for our young boys or our young girls. And after that, we decided to to do it for the whole world. So it's AFDP Global now, and I think that we will work with all NGOs. We'll work with governments, and in a different way, because if you look at the world also, you have NGOs, for example, who work on specific things in countries. But, if we can get them all together and cooperating, that's the best for all of us.
And that was another message from this morning, wasn't it, about collaboration and cooperation?
Well, it has to be really a team effort in that respect. So obviously it's something that we're starting this year from anew, and obviously we'd like to have all the participation of all of you in helping us with that as well, and we'll be at the service of all.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move now to you, Viet. Perhaps in your role as Youth and Sport Task Force with UNESCO, and also I see that you've been working in human trafficking and forced labour, so you have a kind of interesting perspective on some of these issues. So perhaps if you could start off by giving us some of your reflections on the day, and then perhaps we can go a little bit deeper into what kinds of measures you think we can take in order to make this, to allow and to enable young people to enjoy sport.
Right. So good afternoon. I'm deeply honored to be here today to discuss the importance of sport and human rights. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizer and UNESCO for giving me this opportunity to reflect on various sessions today. And to be honest, it is quite overwhelming for a 19-year-old to be here and speak at a mega sport event at the UNESCO. Thank you. Before begin my reflection, I will share my story and some information about my work at as a UNESCO Youth and Sport Task Force member. So my name is Viet, and I'm 19, and I am from Vietnam. I was born and raised in Sapa, a very small town in northern Vietnam, And growing up around 8 different Vietnamese ethnic minority groups, I witnessed how most indigenous women do not have proper educational opportunities, as they are easily manipulated by financial opportunity, leading to many cases where women are sold into forced labor in different countries. And it is something that, honestly, I cannot sit back and do nothing about. This is why a year ago I decided to launch the project Human Trafficking and Forced Labor Prevention class to combat this issue in northern Vietnam. The program uses martial arts and combined with education and life skill classes to support women and children in very hard-to-reach communities to address issues related to human rights abuse. Why we hope that we are contributing to human trafficking prevention, our impact will be only measurable over time. However, we already know that the supportive environment we have created is making a positive difference. Even just letting people know that we are there to help and giving them some practical steps to take is very important. And because of my efforts with my project, in November 2017, I was selected to participate in the UNESCO Sport and SDG Youth Fun Shop with 21 other young talented people from Southeast Asia who had the same vision of using sports for positive social transformations and are running organizations similar to mine. And for the first time of my life, I had the chance to contribute my personal experience of working in this community in sport policy design and decision-making level, something that I had never thought I would have a chance to participate in. And the workshop indeed consolidated my vision of using sports, martial art in my case, to help the children and women in my town from the risk of being sold and trafficked overseas. The outcome of the fun shop was the creation of the UNESCO Asia Pacific Youth and Sport Task Force, which is a very active online and offline network in which I was appointed as a core member. Considering the fact that my project was initiated only a year ago and was led by very young people like me, the UNESCO Youth and Sport Task Force allows me to have a connection to so many different projects within the network where I learned so much from them. I'm telling you this story because I am an example of a young person who is making change in my community, and I am just one of many. Having me here today only is an example how ideas can travel from north to south and also from south to north. This is very important. Now I will move to my reflections on the first day of the Sporting Chance Forum. We began today's conference with important endorsement from the key organizations, further highlighting the importance of reflecting on human rights in sports. I would like to take a step further and consider human rights through sport and how it can be a powerful tool for creating change in communities where human rights abuses remain a key risk. Many of the speakers today have talked about power in sport, both organized sport and also local level sport programs like mine. Within grassroots organizations, sometimes without proper structures and limited funding, the risk can be amplified. It would be great if moving forward, some of the ideas presented today could include perspective from grassroots organizations too. Context is very important, and often when we try to adapt international frameworks to developing countries, it comes with additional challenges. As a community here today, we all need to be aware of this. Today, I represent youth, but I also represent the Global South. Sadly, we do not have enough representation from developing countries in these important discussions. I would like to encourage everyone here today to consider how ideas concerning human rights travel from north to south. As everyone in this room is probably aware, the concept of human rights changes meaning from country to country. And this is something else we need to consider if we want to make these principles to be universal, or otherwise we are at risk of tokenism. As last reflection, I would like to highlight the importance of personal stories. This kind of experience is extremely valuable. For me, the panel that has struck with me the most today was the extremely brave personal stories from the survivors of sexual abuse in sport. I would like to encourage everyone in this room, if you are organizing a conference, to include the voices from the groups you are talking about. It is the non-traditional experts that are often the true experts, especially when discussing human rights. Finally, I am happy to announce that UNESCO, together with Lee Sang-yup Basketball Foundation, who are here today, welcome, will host the next sport and the SDG Youth Fun Shop in Seoul, Korea in 2019. We hope that everyone in this room can get involved in one way or another and support youth from developing countries to make a difference through sport. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you an excellent continuation to your conference.
Viet, thank you so much for that very rich presentation there. And I think, you know, one of the things that strikes me, yes, I know we all clapped when you made that point about the Global South being an absent voice from here. But I have to say, I think we all clapped last year when we said it too. And so what does that tell us? What is it that we've not got quite right and still have to work on? All of us have to work on that. So thank you for reminding us of that. And also that issue around grassroots is really important because, of course, in terms of participation, that's where it's really happening. And those people are no less vulnerable to some of these issues that we've talked of. And perhaps we can have a further conversation about forced labour and trafficking in Vietnam after we finish this session. I'd like to talk to you a bit further about that. But for now, I need to move on swiftly to Brent. And Brent, you know, it was a bit of a burden of representation, I think, for Viet to represent the whole of the South, the Global South. But now we're asking Brent to represent the whole of the corporate sponsorship sector via the Coca-Cola company. I'm sure he'd be absolutely delighted to take on that role. But seriously, I think it is an area that we haven't really addressed, and there are some other areas too, but this one I'm particularly interested in. So I think a number of people have suggested that there is maybe a greater role for the sponsor. But in any case, let's hear your first reflections on the day before we go into that in more detail.
Thank you for that. And may I ask the organisers, please don't put me on after Viet in future. You're not an easy act to follow, let me tell you. When I was 19, I think what I was doing, I have to go and thump myself because I wasn't quite that involved. Anyway, that's all in the past. We can't change that, but let's hope we can do something in the future. Look, thank you for the opportunity. I'm not here for the whole sponsor group that makes up a lot of the money that's associated with these major sports events, but I am here because the Coca-Cola company has been a firm supporter of this initiative from its inception in Nguyen, where when I think back how far we've come, oh my goodness gracious me. As I look out into this room now and see who is involved in this conversation, oh my goodness gracious me. It shows great growth, it shows great development, but we've also got a long way to go. And I think the focus of today on the rights holders, rather that than affected groups sounds like someone who's got TB, but rights holders, which is what this is about. What we're looking at here is how do we as sponsors, how do we as sports organisations do as we do in business, which is look to protect rights holders, that what we do as a business or what we do as a sports organisation does no harm to people. And if harm has occurred, then those people are put right as far as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think this discussion, as we've moved on now, is that sports organisations need to get beyond the debate of do the UN Guiding Principles apply to me or not. The answer is they do. And so, having answered that, we can then move on to think about how we actually start to address the rights holders. And I think today was particularly important. I think it was important to start off by recognising that players, be they in paid employment as players or as amateurs, are at the heart of this. And if we're not protecting players, be they individual or group, what are we doing? Because at the end of the day, without the players, group or individual, you do not have sports. And sports organisations, sponsors and other groups need to recognise they are a key constituency for us. We need to make sure that the voices of those who are rights holders are heard. We've had a lot more of those this time round, and Minky Warden from Human Rights Watch started us on this journey some time ago in thinking about how do we actually address the issues that impact people. And I think the discussion today from those who have survived sexual exploitation and abuse is particularly relevant and particularly poignant going forward and should focus our minds. Because as you said, you're not historical. This is an issue of current concern, and we need to be all making sure that we're doing all that we can to ensure that that's not happening. Change comes from the top. That's important. I think going forward, I would like to see some more CEOs here. I'd like to see some more heads of sports organisations here for the day, not for the speech. This is an engagement where you have to change people's minds, and you don't do that from sitting up the front here saying a few words. You've got to be part of the debate, part of the coffee conversations, and I think that's important. I mean, this is a very imperfect summing up, but I think what we are seeing is some real progress. I think the example from the panel on Paris was particularly important on the social charter. The more we can get ahead of problems rather than run behind and try and fix them, the better. The best human rights abuse to remedy is the one that never happens. And I think if we take that proactive look and not wait for things to go wrong before you fix them, the better off we are. We now have the Human Rights Centre. I am so proud that we have this centre. This has been a long haul, 3 years, but a long haul. And I know with Mary now in charge, we have an organisation that will step forward and step up. But we've all got to remain involved. We cannot now just say, job done and walk away. We all must continue to play the role we need to play and the role that Mary and her team is going to ask from us as we move forward to make sure that this centre is really what it is we all hope it to be. And so you have the support from me, Mary, the Coca-Cola company. I'll drag him kicking and screaming if I have to into this debate, because for us as a global brand, you never ever want to be associated with a global bad. And what you have with sport is globalisation. It is a global reality, and we need to be active in making sure that sport is all that it can be in the positive force for change. So a great day. I'm pleased to see the panels tomorrow. We're going to have the fans coming in, which is, again, a new voice in this discussion. And it's incredible how you've arranged this to bring these new voices to the fore. And as a 58-year-old, I have to apologise for all that I failed to do.
Brent, no apology needed, I don't think. But I'd be interested to know a little bit more from you about what more you think sponsors can do.
Sponsors need to be in the room. They need to be here and they need to be listening to this discussion, and they need to be making sure that when they're looking at their sponsorship arrangements, they're doing the proper due diligence which the UN Guiding Principles requires of them as a business to do in every other part of the business. And I think at times that is lacking. I think at times there is an assumption of the enthusiasm around the sport. What a great event. Of course we want to be involved. And the ink is signed on the cheque and off we go. It requires more than that now. You've really got to do your homework and your due diligence. Make sure you know who it is you're getting associated with, what they are doing in their human rights journey that gives you confidence that when you hand them your brand, you're giving them that brand with confidence. Because at the moment, we're still playing catch-up. Many of our relationships are historical. They last for many years. So we're playing catch-up at the moment. But going forward, that's what we need to do more of, making sure we're working with the right partners the right way. And my hope is that through the Sports Centre from sponsors, we'll have an opportunity to engage with some of these sports groups in a way which we haven't done before, not just from Atlanta, but actually down on the ground, talking with the people who are going to be holding these events.
Thank you very much. Now, John has just told me time's up, but I'm going to ignore that because by my reckoning, we've got another 3 minutes, and that's not going over time, John.
We have a baroness and a prince.
Yeah,
we
so
will.
trump that. So
take that.
So I think, although it's a little bit unfair, is there somebody who can make one last comment or question brief that will allow each of the panellists to say something briefly in conclusion? No speeches, autobiographies or life histories? Okay, yes, you've got your hand up.
What is your vision for the progress that we will make by next year's forum?
Brilliant question. Absolutely. Who would like to start?
I think Mary should.
I think from here, she'll have plenty of time to ponder this. Brent, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think coming back to some of the things that Viet mentioned in terms of the geographic mix, how we can facilitate the engagement from other regions, particularly the developing world, and also some of the amateur groups, how we can again help and bring those voices to the discussion. For me, that's a big step. But again, at the end of the day, we're going into an advisory board meeting on Friday with Mary, and Mary, I'm sure, has some points of view as to how she'd like to see this next year as well.
Thank you. Yeah?
So my project started out as a very small project, and we work in a very small town, and we're trying to help the locals there with the human trafficking issues. But I would say that it will be very difficult for us to be developed more next year. But with the help of UNESCO and, of course, the task force, it allows me to have the connection to a very big network in the Asia-Pacific area, where I learn a lot from them and really get the recognition from from different organizations that help me to develop my own project. So that's why I'm saying that it is very important to have like a big network like the task force, and with the help of UNESCO for us to be developed better next year and the following years. Thank you.
Yes, I think just to be brief about this, I think that this forum and this platform is crucial across the board to give the voice for people who cannot often do that otherwise. You live in a world right now where sometimes if you want to get something done with certain organizations and others, then you have to be loud and you have to embarrass them a little bit into taking actions. And this forum in particular is one that can fulfill, I believe, that role in a strong way. And obviously, as our colleagues were saying, I mean, it will develop more and more. And we just have to obviously support Mary Harvey and all the team that's been working on this. And no doubt, I've known Mary for quite a while, and I know that she's going to do an excellent job in this. And she is a goalkeeper, by the way, so, yep. So in that respect, she'll definitely be somebody who's going to protect the sport, and all sports across the board. So we wish the best of luck, and I think just on behalf of all of us, I think that obviously you have to know that you'll have our full support as well. You start and we'll follow and we'll support you all the way. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So just 1 minute over, we're going to finish now. So I just want to thank our panellists again, and thank you for that brilliant last question. But for my own, I guess what I would say would be that some of the ways in which people have worked together, I'd be very interested to know next year what the outcome of that working together is. And I say this partly because through the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Sport, Modern Slavery and Human Rights, which we mentioned last year, that is now up and running, and we're in the middle of an inquiry. And also at the conference last year, I met Lorena Bright from Mission 89, and we've been working together ever since over the past year. So things can happen, and I think it would be great if we could learn more about what happens in between conferences. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you.